I love One Piece, and if you've clicked this video, you probably do too. But why? Is it because of the world building, lovable characters, deep lore, or the cohesive plot? In truth, there are many reasons to love One Piece, as well as some to criticize it. So I decided to create an in-depth review exploring the story, arc by arc. Let's start at the beginning. The East Blue Saga begins with Romance Dawn, an arc that serves as the introduction to the world and our two main characters, Zoro and Luffy. But other than some fan interpretation, our duo is nothing more than a pair of homies. So where does the romance in Romance Dawn come from? The term romance means the feeling of excitement and mystery for an adventure. A brilliant title for the introduction of a show like One Piece and a protagonist like Luffy. We see this quality solidified in the opening of the first chapter itself, which starts with the king of the pirates announcing the beginning of the pirate era while being executed. And then the scene immediately shifts to a little Luffy stabbing himself in the face to prove that he is tough enough to travel with Shanks on a sea voyage. But despite Luffy's romance for his adventure on the seas, Shanks knows he isn't ready, so he refuses. In anger, Luffy steals one of his fruits and eats it. Then we realize he just ate the gum fruit and turned into a rubberman. Then comes the fight with the mountain bandits. Shanks doesn't get angry despite being disrespected by the bandit leader and just laughs. However, later on, when Luffy is attacked by the bandits, he shows no mercy and delivers one of the hardest lines ever.
Now that you've drawn your pistol, are you willing to use it?
What the hell are you talking about?
I'm saying that guns aren't for threats, they're for actions.
Just to lose all that aura by getting his hand bitten off by a sea king, this moment had the fandom torn for years, because Shanks was supposed to be an extremely strong pirate at this point, with abilities to reinforce his arm and sense danger. And that fact is proven even more when we see him use Conqueror's haki to easily scare away the Sea King moments later. So for hundreds of chapters, the question remained, why did he let this happen? And we finally got some answers to that, but let's discuss them later. Coming back to the story, Luffy cries out to see Shanks lose an arm. He feels extreme guilt due to partly being the reason for his loss. But Shanks reassures him by giving him his straw hat, a gift he received from his own idol. Shanks begins to depart, but before doing so, he and Luffy make a pact. Luffy says he will make his own pirate crew, which would be even better than Shanks's, and that once he becomes a great pirate, he will return the straw hat. This single hat carries so much meaning and depth that it could get its own video. Anyways, after receiving the hat, a huge time skip happens where Luffy trains together with his brothers and grandpa until he is ready to set sail. All of this happens in a single pilot chapter. We get introduced to the general world, our main character, bounties, devil fruits, haki, with a side of a mini character development arc for Luffy. This is as good a start as you can ask for. Another thing I find interesting is that One Piece is often criticized for having practically no deaths, but in this single chapter, we see Roger, the NPC mountain bandit, and his leader all die. 3 deaths in just the first chapter. Moving on, Luffy beats up the Lord of the Coast. He fulfills his revenge on the Sea King for stealing Shanks' ability to clap. Then he somehow gets into a barrel and meets with Kobe. He then liberates him from a fat woman, and the two travel to a bounty hunter who is imprisoned by a corrupt regime. While getting to him, he meets up with a little girl and realizes that Zoro had sacrificed his freedom so that he could save a stranger's child. He instantly analyzes his character and asks him to join his crew. Zoro agrees on the condition that his goal to become the strongest swordsman won't change. Luffy agrees, as the king of the pirates won't have anything less than the best, and so he liberates him from his shackles too. Finally, Luffy beats Kobe up so that he wouldn't be associated with pirates. He does this so Kobe can fulfill his dream of becoming a marine. An interesting detail I like to think about is the fact that before even Kobe realized what Luffy was doing, the marine captain on the island knew it. He knew Kobe was an associate of Luffy, and he still took him into the Marines to pay his respect to the guy who liberated their town. This is proved further by the fact that the group of Marines salutes the future Straw Hat Pirates as they depart on another journey after liberating the town. Just goes to show how even a random nameless character in One Piece can have so much personality. The Warrior of Liberation thing was right in front of our faces since the start, wasn't it? All in all, a solid 8 out of 10 first arc. Then comes Orange Town, where Nami is first introduced. She teams up with Luffy to free the town from a tyrannical pirate named Buggy. But while doing that, we see a random dog protecting his dead owner's shop. For some reason, Luffy takes a liking to him, and while holding onto the straw hat on his head, declares that he is protecting his treasure. Just a few moments later, we see this re-emphasized when Buggy stabs the straw hat, and Luffy reveals that his hat is his own treasure because it was given to him by Shanks. Similar to how Choo Choo's shop was his treasure because it belonged to his late owner. Upon hearing this, Buggy declares that he does know the red-haired pirate, and they used to be apprentices of the same crew. I wonder what crew that is. Overall, a 7.5 out of 10 arc. Then comes Syrup Village, and we get another addition to the crew. A chronic liar who never lies. Usopp is seemingly nothing more than a cat, but all his lies cries come true, just at a different moment in time. Like when he cries to the village about a pirate attack, no one believes him as he always lies. But later on, Captain Kuro does attack the village. Many such unintentional predictions happen further into the series as well. Like when Usopp tells Kaya about a fish that is so huge, it leaves behind turds the size of islands. This is a lie at the moment, but it turns into reality in Little Garden. We'll talk about Usopp's prophecies later. Let's first talk about our main villain in this arc. Captain Kuro is a brilliant villain in early One Piece. I love how his character connects with Romance Dawn, as he had used a dummy to fake his death and then hypnotized Axe-Handed Morgan into believing he had killed him. This solves the mystery of why a person as weak as Axe-Hand Morgan was able to climb up the ranks and how Kuro was able to fake his death while also giving a good connection to previous arcs instead of just forgetting about them. It's called good world building, my friends. A few episodes later, we realize why he faked his death and was acting as Kaya's butler. His motivation to do this was to live a normal life far from piracy so that he wouldn't always have a target stuck to his back. Many people argue that he did succeed in doing just that while serving Kaya, so his motivation wasn't well written, but they seem to forget the fact that he hated exactly that. He hated the idea of serving someone, which is why he devised a whole plan to kill his boss, Kaya, and take over her wealth. He also planned to bring his old pirate crew to raid the village, just kill them. His plan was simple yet effective. He would become a village hero this way, and also erase any trace of his past as a pirate, which is also why Luffy hated him. Kuro committed two unforgivable sins in Luffy's eyes. He abandoned his dream and tried to hurt his own friends, and so Luffy beats him funny and then takes the Mary and leaves. Then, in the very end, it's revealed to us that Usopp picked up the habit of lying about pirates coming to their village because his father, Yasop, had abandoned his family to become a pirate, and Usopp wanted to give some hope to his dying mother in her tough times. One interesting thing that stuck with me on the rewatch was this scene where Usopp is describing the predicament with his village. Here, Nami says that she doesn't care about his village and just wants some reward money. This is weird for Nami to say, considering her own village is in a grave predicament of its own. Was this just a gag moment, or was this Nami overcompensating with her obsession with money to steer away from her own struggle to liberate her village? Regardless, this arc is extremely underrated due to the slow pacing in the anime. But the One Piece Aizen show Kuro saying it was all part of my plan, and the dynamic between Luffy and Usopp just make me want to rate this arc an 8.5 out of 10. Regardless, this arc is extremely underrated due to the slow pacing in the anime. But the One Piece Aizen and the dynamic between Luffy and Usopp just make me want to rate this arc an 8.5 out of 10. Then comes Baratie. This arc was an emotional roller coaster. From the introduction of Sanji to Mihawk, it was entertaining throughout, but in the middle, it did become a bit stale with the prolonged fight scenes. But that gave us Krieg posting, so it was an overall positive. One thing that I like to think about regarding this arc in the anime is how they changed Sanji's backstory. Originally, when Zeph and Sanji are stranded on the island with no food, it is shown that Zeph sacrificed all his food for Sanji and literally ate his own leg to ward off hunger. I believe this turn of events showcases the message of Zeph passing on the torch to Sanji well. Both of them were cooks who dreamed of going to the All Blue, so it makes sense why Zeph would want to support Sanji's dream like it was his own. But when you really think about it, it doesn't make sense logistically. As a successful pirate, he would have certainly had a far better chance at survival than a poor little cook kid when it comes to the race to starvation. So logically, he should have either kept the food for himself or given half to Sanji. And biologically speaking, eating your own leg isn't really the best move while starving. Now, don't get me wrong, what happened in the manga still works well, but I believe the anime did this aspect of the backstory better. In the show, instead of eating his own leg, Zeph loses it after getting tangled in a metal anchor rope after both he and Sanji had fallen into the stormy sea. Here, he chose to cut off his leg in an instant. He did to survive and to save Sanji. This being an instant decision in a life or death situation just makes his choice seem far more realistic than the manga counterpart. And carrying it forward, it also makes sense why a pirate who robs and loots others would be ready to sacrifice himself for Sanji. Other than that, I don't think this arc has any other flaws or missed opportunities. It serves as a good turning point for Zoro's character after the crushing defeat from Mihawk and builds up the mystery with Nami after she saw Arlong's bounty poster. The highlight of the arc is undoubtedly Sanji's character. From the very beginning, his self-sacrificing nature is evident. He prioritizes Zeph's dream of building a sailing hotel over his own aspirations, and we later see the reason for this is that he was regarded as a useless failure of an experiment by his father. But eventually, our good-hearted crackhead convinces the guy to give his dream a chance, and his cook family practically forces him to believe in himself in one of the most heartwarming goodbyes ever. Moving on, we have possibly the most iconic arc in early One Piece, Arlong Park. This is the arc that hooks almost every One Piece fan. When you recommend One Piece to your friend, you tell them to at least get to Arlong Park. This is also where the themes of racism and liberation rise to the surface. So far, we have seen many things built throughout the story. We have seen Nami's face contort at the sight of Arlong's bounty poster. We see her pain when she left the Straw Hat crew to go back to her prison, and we even saw her overcompensating with her gag when Usopp was talking about the safety of his village. When the arc starts, we are under the assumption that Nami betrayed the crew and has escaped back to her own crew, made up of fishmen. This is odd because when we meet the fishmen, they are very loudly fishmen supremacists. They view humans as bugs, and yet work with Nami. Now it's obvious that they are just using her for navigation skills, but why is Nami complying with them? We also see her fake killing Usopp to save him, and indirectly saving Zoro too. This confuses the Straw Hats, so they meet up with Nojiko, and she begins to explain Nami's history and why she is doing everything. But interestingly, Luffy and Zoro just walk away or doze off, not wanting to hear Nami's backstory. This scene is initially seen as just another gag moment, but the writing beneath the surface here is deeper than you may think. In fact, the writing is so subtle that even the live action didn't understand this scene and ended up making Luffy listen to Nojiko's yap. Think about it. It makes no sense for such a caring character to just walk away from hearing a friend's history. It's not like him to not care. Usually, some other protagonist will listen to the backstory with teary eyes and then decide to help Nami to the fullest. But what Luffy did here went against the flow, not because he didn't care, but because he cared too much. His actions showed that he did not need to hear tragic tales to sympathize with his comrades. Throughout the whole story, he never heard what happened to Nami. He just chose to fight Arlong because the goofy fish made his nakama cry. That's all the reason he needed, and all the reason he wanted. A perfect representation of how writing as simple as Luffy's can have an ocean's worth of depth. And following this came the moment when Arlong scammed Nami. When he talked about being true to his word regarding money, I myself had actually believed it. For some reason, he did seem genuine. And from what we have learned so far about him, that is actually what he likely would have done if he were dealing with a fishman. His racism literally runs so deep that his own morals were compromised without a second thought when he was dealing with a human. And unfortunately, this parallels real life more than what I'd like to be true. Humans will commit gross atrocities against each other by simply dehumanizing someone else. It could be done through many means like classism, nationalism, and like in this case, racism. That being said, we come to the finale of this arc. Nami realized she had been swiped by Arlong, and the freedom of her village was impossible to retake. The 8 years she spent risking her life and stealing from deadly pirates were all for nothing, and the villagers she tried to protect were now going to fight to their death for her sake. She broke down to her knees and looked at the symbol of the Arlong pirates on her shoulder, the symbol that represented all the oppression she had faced, the symbol of the pirate crew that killed her mother, the symbol of her prison. She couldn't bear to look at it for another moment and made use of the knife in her hand to get rid of it. She couldn't do anything anymore. She had no choice, no freedom. So at least she could choose to hurt herself. That was the only choice she had left. But then a hand caught her knife, and she felt a straw hat land on her head. Luffy had given her his hat, the thing he treasured the most. It was a sign of trust, an act of showing how much Nami means to Luffy. He was showing that he cared, but he did not say another word. He showed he was willing to help, but he was not going to force his help onto someone who didn't want it, regardless of how much they needed it. Because one thing Luffy holds above all else is freedom. And now he had shown Nami she had the freedom to ask for help, and so she did. When Luffy said, "Let's go," the story changed its course forever. This was the moment when a ragtag group of misfits who had nothing in common except improbable dreams became a pirate crew. It was here that they truly became the Straw Hat Pirates. I also love how the Zoro brothers are just sitting in front of the gate and constantly hyping the Straw Hats up. Don't worry, they'll be here soon. I bet my life on it. And those are the faces of the 4 men who are here to change your destiny. Burn their images into your memory. Our generational quotes that get better and better the more the story progresses. And then we have our usual epic One Piece battle, with one notable detail being that Arlong might have somehow used an instinctual version of Haki here, because he was able to locate Luffy's position mid-air without looking at him, and Luffy said he did it by instinct. Then finally, the arc ends with a pinwheel toy lying next to Bellemere's grave. It was a toy that made Nami laugh in tough times, and it was also the toy that inspired one of Luffy's moves. But now that the village was safe and Nami was freed from her prison, there was no longer a need for the mayor to carry this toy around, and it could rest alongside Nami's mother. A beautiful way to wrap up this heart-gripping arc. As most One Piece fans say, this is where they first fell in love with the series, and because of that, I can't give this arc anything less than a 9.2 out of 10. Now, finally, Loguetown. As the name suggests, it's supposed to be the epilogue of the prologue, essentially the end of East Blue, and the real start of One Piece as our crew enters the Grand Line's paradise. The theme of this island being the end of the beginning is even more prevalent further. Not only is this the last island before entering the Grand Line, but it's also the birthplace of Gold Roger, the king of the pirates. And at the same time, it's also the place he was executed at. And implying parallels to Roger, Luffy himself was almost executed by Buggy before fate struck his sword with lightning. The ongoing theme of fate or destiny especially comes to the surface in this arc. These words are even directly mentioned in one particular instance. In chapter 96, when Luffy's first bounty is revealed to the world, the baddie in his hometown is happy about him progressing his dream, but the geezer mayor drops a hard bar in the cliffhanger, asking if it's his dream or is it destiny. That being said, the arc doesn't linger for too long in the manga. There is some excellent filler in the anime, but the manga arc is only 5 chapters long. The arc just brings back Alvida Light and Buggy Automobile, and introduces Lodius and Dragon. And in the end, we get the iconic moment of the whole crew announcing their dream to the world as the storm rains on in the background and wraps up the whole saga in a nice, sweet moment. Overall, an 8.8 out of 10 arc, and a 9.1 arc in the anime. This is one of the very few times the anime did an entire arc better than the manga. And now, we move on to the next saga, the one where One Piece starts to get really real. Alabasta. Or is it Arabasta? Hard to tell.